My name is Evelyn Harrow, and I am 79 years old. For 55 of those years, I was known only as Richard Harrow's wife, the quiet woman in the kitchen, the one who smiled politely at company dinners, the one who made soup while he built an empire. 5 days ago, Richard was lowered into the earth. The lilies on his casket are still fresh enough to perfume the house, but already his family has gathered here, not to mourn, but to divide. My son Gregory, tall and sharp-jawed like his father, said it the moment I stepped into the parlour. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's 92 million, Mum." The room erupted in laughter. My grandson slapped neon-green sticky notes on the furniture. "This one's mine." His sister scanned the walls with an app, whispering about tearing out the wallpaper once I was gone. I clutched the banister, my body shaking, though not from weakness. They thought I was already fading. A burden, a ghost, a woman too old to matter. But what none of them know is that hidden in my pocket, warm against my palm, is a single piece of paper. A document signed in blue ink, not black, the kind of ink that changes everything. And when the will is read tomorrow, it won't just be Richard Harrow's name they hear. It will be mine. The night after Richard's funeral, the house no longer felt like mine. The lights were too bright, the voices too loud. My daughter-in-law, Clarissa, walked around with a tray of champagne flutes, grinning as though she were hosting a wedding instead of a wake. "We're celebrating Dad's legacy," she said cheerfully. Legacy. That word echoed in my chest like a cruel joke. I sat in the mudroom, on a folding chair that wobbled on one leg. In front of me, a mop bucket and a broken broom. On my lap, a paper plate with dry chicken and overcooked potatoes. Behind me, the muffled roar of my family, laughing, clinking glasses, calling dibs on Richard's empire like shoppers on Black Friday.
"She built soup, Dad built an empire, she built soup."
The laughter that followed was sharp, careless. I swallowed the insult with a bite of chalky chicken, and I didn't answer. They didn't know the truth, because when the company nearly collapsed 15 years ago, when Richard came home with trembling hands whispering about bankruptcy, it wasn't lawyers or bankers who saved him, it was me. I sold my mother's emerald necklace, my wedding bangles, even the brooch I wore the night Richard asked me to marry him. I wired every dollar into the company's escrow account, and I told him only one thing: use it. But don't ever tell them it came from me. He didn't. And now my family thinks I was nothing more than soup and silence. But tomorrow, when that blue ink document is read, they will finally learn whose hands truly built their golden inheritance. I remember that night as if it were yesterday. Richard had been pacing the den, his tie loose, his glass of scotch untouched on the mantel. His board had rejected every draft of his presentation for the investors in New York. "We'll lose everything," he muttered. "They want innovation, and I've got nothing new to give them." I sat quietly in the armchair, hands folded, listening. He didn't notice the way my fingers itched for a pen. He didn't know that before I became Mrs. Richard Harrow, I was Evelyn Brightwood, a name that once appeared on business journals and trade proposals. But when marriage came, I put that part of me away like a winter coat, tucked in the back of a closet. That night, I pulled it back out. When the house finally fell silent, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile and wrote until dawn. I drafted a 3-phase expansion model, a shareholder strategy, a scalable plan for supply chain reform. My words bled across the paper in long loops of ink. By sunrise, my fingers ached, but the work was done. I didn't sign it Evelyn Harrow. I signed it with a name I'd once used in college, L. Brightwood, a ghostwriter for my own husband's future. I mailed it the next morning. No return address, just his name on the envelope. 2 nights later, Richard came home with fire in his eyes. "You won't believe this," he said, dropping his briefcase. "A stranger sent me a proposal. Brilliant. Saved the whole deal." He laughed, pouring himself that long-forgotten scotch. "Even the handwriting looks familiar, like yours." I stirred the soup and said nothing. 6 months later, that proposal became the foundation of the company's IPO. It brought in over $40 million. The board called him a visionary. They called him self-made. They called him genius. And me, I was never called at all. But tomorrow, the silence ends. It was a Tuesday, 5 days after the funeral, when they began the clearing. The house still smelled faintly of lilies and pine from the casket spray, but their energy had shifted. Grief was over. Now came the claiming. I heard the sound first. The screech of drawers yanked open upstairs, the clatter of boxes being filled. By the time I reached the staircase, Gregory's wife, Clarissa, was already directing like a general in battle. "That end table's perfect for the cabin," she said, pointing with a manicured finger. Her husband slapped a neon pink sticker on the oak surface. "This one's mine." I watched as they moved from room to room, leaving bright-coloured bruises across my life. My wedding china, the rocking chair where I nursed Gregory through croup, even the record player Richard and I danced to during blackouts. Each one claimed, each one tagged. "She doesn't need a room," Clarissa announced with a polished smile. "Just a bed until she's gone." A few awkward chuckles followed. Someone suggested the laundry room. My laundry room. By evening, my perfume bottles, my books, my silk scarves had been stuffed into boxes marked "Donation Outdated Old Lady Junk." I stood frozen as they wheeled a suitcase into my bedroom, the room where Richard and I once whispered secrets in the dark, and claimed it for a weekend guest. That night, I lay on a cot in the laundry room, staring at a flickering bulb and the rusted sink. A framed photo from our 30th anniversary had been shoved behind the fridge, the glass cracked. I found it when I went to get some water. I wiped the dust off the faces, mine smiling, Richard's hand on my shoulder, and pressed it to my chest. They thought they had erased me. But as I slid the photo beneath my pillow, I whispered to myself, "They don't know the folder, and tomorrow I would make them remember." That night, the house pulsed with muffled laughter from the dining room. I could hear the scrape of steak knives, the clink of wine glasses. Clarissa's voice carried through the vent. "She can eat after we're done." I sat on the cot in the laundry room with a dented thermos and a tin of soup I'd hidden weeks ago. No can opener. I used the jagged edge of a key to pry it open. I ate in silence, spoonful by spoonful, letting their laughter echo above me like thunder. They thought I was fading, that I was too weak to notice, too old to matter. But they had forgotten something vital. I remember everything, and I had prepared for this moment years ago. When the house finally stilled, I rose slowly, knees stiff, and pulled back the crate of mop heads in the corner. The floorboard beneath it was loose. I pried it up with trembling fingers and lifted out the leather-bound folder I'd hidden long ago. The edges were worn, the paper inside yellowed with time. I pressed it to my chest. My heart steadied. My pulse was loud, undeniable. Inside that folder lived every secret they thought I'd buried. The joint trust certificate with my name inked beside Richard's. Co-founder, co-executor. The investment agreement from First Savings Bank, showing my dowry and heirlooms sold to rescue the company. And finally the handwritten proposal, the same one Richard called Anonymous Brilliance. Signed with a name they never thought to trace, L. Brightwood. Tomorrow they would sit in their fine clothes, sipping coffee, smirking, waiting to carve me out of the will. But I had already made a phone call. Mr. Alden, Richard's lawyer for decades and mine long before that, had answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said, and he replied without hesitation, "Come in tomorrow." The next morning I left the house before anyone else had stirred. My steps were light, my cardigan pulled close against the autumn chill. I carried the folder tucked under my arm, the way a soldier might carry a weapon. At the corner, the pharmacy payphone waited, its metal cold against my palm. My cell service had been cut off. "A mistake," Clarissa had said with that polished smile, but I hadn't forgotten the number. Mr. Alden's voice, steady and low, answered. By noon, I was in his office. The building smelled faintly of leather and dust, the same as it had decades ago when Richard first signed his contracts here. But this time, I was the one placing documents across the polished desk. First, the trust certificate. My name written not as witness, not as dependent, but as co-founder. Mr. Alden adjusted his glasses, his brows lifting. Then, the bank memorandum. The deposit dated 15 years ago, the jewellery sold, the gold bangles gone. Finally, I slid forward the yellowed pages. My handwriting, my strategy, the foundation of the IPO, signed not Evelyn Harrow, but L. Brightwood.
You wrote this?
I sent it, I said softly. Anonymous. He presented it as his own. He sat back, silent for a long while, then reached into his cabinet. He pulled out a file, opened it, and laid down a typed letter signed with the same name, L. Brightwood. The handwriting matched. Within the hour, a specialist from Stanford sat in that office comparing loops and lines, the slant of my cursive, the pauses in my strokes. He spent 2 hours bent over the papers.
It's a match, 100%.
Mr. Alden folded his hands, his eyes locked onto mine.
Mrs. Harrow, do you understand what this means?
It means they don't get to erase me anymore. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Small, steady, certain. When I stepped back into the house, the laughter hit me like a wall. It was mid-afternoon and they were already drinking again. Champagne bottles on the counter. Take-out boxes on the dining table where my china once stood. No one noticed me at first. To them, I was a shadow in the hallway. Something that blended into the wallpaper.
Let's paint the master bedroom pink once she's out. Spa vibes.
She won't last long. Dad always said she'd go first.
Laughter rippled again. I stood very still, the folder now hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the laundry room once more. My pulse was steady, but inside, a storm gathered.
Mom, you should probably pack up some of your things. Makes it easier for everyone when, well, you know.
I nodded, lips pressed shut. He mistook my silence for surrender.
For you. We'll eat around 7. You can have your dinner after.
That night, I sat on the cot, eating crackers from my pocket while their laughter thundered above me. But I didn't mind. Not anymore, because I had already sat across from Mr. Alden. I had already heard the analyst's verdict. I had already been told, in no uncertain terms, that my name, Evelyn Harrow, was stitched into the very fabric of the empire they believed belonged only to Richard. They thought I was invisible. But invisibility, I realized, could be the sharpest weapon of all. And when the will was read, they would see me not as a ghost, but as the author of their inheritance. Long before the empire, before the glass offices and black-tinted cars, there was just Richard and me in a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store in Dayton, Ohio. The wallpaper peeled, the pipes clanged, and winters seeped through the windows like ghosts. But we were in love. Or at least I was. I had dreams then, quiet ones, folded away like linens I never took out. Teaching literature at a community college, publishing the short stories I wrote in spiral notebooks, maybe even seeing my name in print, Evelyn Harrow, author. But the company came first. Richard's vision consumed everything, and when the first deal went south, it was my mother's diamond earrings I sold. When payroll was short, it was the gold bangles from my wedding day that vanished into a pawnshop's till. Just until things stabilize, he'd said, his hands warm on mine. They never did. Not fully. Each sacrifice became permanent, and each time I told myself it was love. Then came Gregory, my only child, my miracle. Nights spent rocking him through fevers, mornings walking him to school. I thought raising him would mean loyalty, closeness. That one day he'd look back and see the quiet strength it took to hold everything together. But children don't always see. When Richard's company finally grew, when the stock soared, I faded further. At Gallus, I was introduced as Richard's wife. In photographs, I was cropped at the edges. At family dinners, Richard praised the team at the office, never the woman who typed the first letters, drafted the first proposal, mortgaged her future for his chance. I told myself it didn't matter, that my reward was stability, family, home. But now, decades later, as I listened to my granddaughter laugh about painting over my bedroom, I realized the cruelest truth. By giving everything, I had taught them to see me as nothing, and that was about to change. The house was restless that night, like it knew a storm was coming. Doors opened and shut upstairs, suitcases thudded on hardwood floors. I could hear the muffled rustle of papers, each of them preparing, whispering, scheming for their share of Richard's fortune. I sat on my cot in the laundry room, the single bulb humming overhead. My hands were folded in my lap, steady, though my heart beat like a slow drum. They thought tomorrow was their coronation, their chance to be crowned heirs of an empire they never built. Gregory had polished his shoes twice that evening. I heard the brush against the leather, rhythmic, eager. Clarissa rehearsed in front of the hallway mirror, practicing her sympathetic nods, her perfectly timed sighs. Of course we'll make sure Evelyn is taken care of. I could almost hear her rehearsing the lie, but none of them knew about the folder. After they fell silent, I crept upstairs, moving slowly, careful not to wake the house. I slipped into the master bedroom, my bedroom, though it now smelled faintly of Clarissa's perfume, and opened the dresser drawer. Beneath Richard's ties, still neatly folded, I placed a small photograph, our wedding day. My eyes were bright, my smile wide, my veil crooked in the wind. I wasn't leaving tokens for them. I was leaving markers for myself, proof that I existed. Back downstairs, I pulled the folder from beneath the floorboard one last time. I smoothed its surface, ran my fingers over the signature, and whispered to Richard's ghost, "You will not erase me, not any more." I slept lightly that night, if you could call it sleep at all. Every creak of the house, every distant car that passed on the street, felt like the ticking of a clock winding down. Tomorrow, everything would change, for them, and for me. Morning sunlight spilled across the Harrow estate, but it did little to warm the tension that had settled like fog in every corner. The family gathered in the drawing room, all polished smiles and carefully rehearsed grief. Gregory paced near the fireplace, checking his watch. Clarissa arranged the chairs as if she were hosting a luncheon instead of a will reading. The grandchildren hovered, smartphones poised to record anything they could claim as entertainment. I arrived quietly, dressed in a soft grey coat, hair pinned neatly back. My steps were measured. They barely glanced up. To them, I was the aged widow, a familiar shadow in their empire. No threat, no power, no claim. The lawyer, Mr. Alden, cleared his throat. The room hushed. He pulled out the will, scanning its pages. "They'll get the lake house," someone whispered. "Dad always said it was mine." "Lexus," another said, smirking. I stood silently in the corner, hands folded. My pulse, steady, my folder tucked beneath my arm. The room erupted in chatter again, until Mr. Alden's eyes found mine. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod passed between us. And then the lawyer began to speak.
Before we read the allocations as outlined in Mr. Harrow's will, there is a matter that must be addressed. A document has been submitted proving co-ownership and investment rights.
I felt their gazes flick toward me. Confusion, surprise, dread. The first whispers started. "Mum, what?" I let the folder rest lightly on the table.
Co-founder, co-investor, authorship of the IPO proposal? Mr. Alden's voice was steady, but each word landed like a hammer.
Silence fell. Not a nervous shuffle, not a polite cough. Silence like the weight of a century. And in that silence, for the first time in decades, I felt fully alive. The room had gone still, each person frozen mid-breath, their eyes flicking between me and Mr. Alden.
Mom, this can't be real.
You're saying she...
Yes, Mrs. Harrow is named co-founder, co-investor and holds proven authorship of the IPO proposal that saved the company 15 years ago. The original documents have been verified by a certified handwriting analyst.
Murmurs erupted. But that can't, Richard, he... I let them stumble through their disbelief, let them fumble for answers. I leaned lightly on the back of a chair, the corners of my mouth lifting in a small, quiet smile. This folder is the truth. The history you've ignored, the sacrifices you dismissed, the empire you thought was yours alone. It has my fingerprints all over it. Suddenly, the children's laughter from the past week seemed absurd, childish. Sticky notes on furniture, remodeling apps, mocking words. They had all underestimated me.
Grandma!
Yes, I built the bridge you all crossed to inherit what you think was yours. I made the calls, wrote the proposals, sold the heirlooms. Everything you mock, everything you take for granted. I made it real. Gregory's hands shook. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Clarissa's face had gone pale. Even the youngest, the one who had claimed the Hermes scarves, looked at me as if he had glimpsed a ghost, but one that could burn. Silence stretched. Tension hung like a curtain about to be torn down. And in that silence I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Not fear, not anger, but power. Pure, undeniable, long-suppressed power. The air in the drawing room felt thick, almost suffocating as the reality sank in. Gregory's face flushed crimson. Clarissa's hands trembled as she clutched her champagne flute. The grandchildren shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their games of claiming furniture and wealth had been meaningless.
The joint trust names Mrs. Harrow as co-executor. The investment account she funded 15 years ago with her personal assets legally entitles her to a significant share, and the IPO proposal, copyright and authorship rights revert to her. Any royalties accumulated over the years, millions, are rightfully hers.
Gasps, stammers, and nervous laughter erupted.
What?
I did not ask for recognition back then. I did not seek their credit, because I believed family came first. I sacrificed silently. I nurtured. I protected. And yes, I made soup. But I also made this. Everything you think you inherited without effort, without care, without understanding. I made it possible. And now, the truth is undeniable.
You mean all those investments? The IPO?
Yes, all of it. For a long moment, they did not speak. The air vibrated with disbelief, anger, shame, and a dawning fear. They had mocked me, erased me, ignored me, and yet here I stood, fully visible, fully alive, holding the key to the empire they believed was theirs alone. And in that room, for the first time in decades, the balance had shifted. The room was a mix of stunned silence and whispered panic. I let it stretch, letting them feel the weight of decades of erasure. Tomorrow, you will all sit at this table and recognize that I am not a ghost. I am not a placeholder. I am the co-founder, the investor, the architect of the legacy you thought you owned. And I will be treated accordingly.
Mom, this changes everything.
No, it only restores what was always mine, what I built, what I protected, what you stole in silence.
We didn't know,
You never asked. You never looked. You never paused. You assumed silence meant uselessness. You assumed love meant absence. You were wrong. For the first time, they saw me as I had always been, not the shadow in the background, not the meek mother, the quiet wife, but a woman who made decisions that saved everything, a woman whose intelligence had been invisible because it served others, not herself. I will not argue for money. I only ask for recognition, for respect, for truth. And from now on, that will be non-negotiable. The room held its breath. I could feel the old power returning to my bones, the slow, certain heat of authority spreading through me. They had spent a week measuring rooms, taping names to furniture, pretending I was gone. The morning sun slanted through the Harrow estate windows, painting the drawing room gold. The family gathered again, all dressed in their finest, smiles forced, eyes darting nervously. They had rehearsed their claims, their arguments, their entitlement, but none of it mattered anymore. Mr. Alden entered with a quiet authority, the folder tucked under his arm. I followed, head held high, every step measured, deliberate. The room went still the moment we arrived.
I have something to present before the reading of the will. Documents proving co-ownership, investment, and authorship rights belong to Mrs. Evelyn Harrow. The IPO proposal that saved this company was written and submitted by her.
Gasps rippled through the room. Gregory's knees buckled slightly. Clarissa's fingers tightened around her clutch. The grandchildren whispered to each other in disbelief. For years you treated me as invisible. You mocked my meals, my rooms, my quiet life. You assumed silence meant absence, obedience meant weakness. But I am here. I built this. I protected this. And today, the truth cannot be ignored. Mr. Alden, all verified, all legally binding. Narrator VO. Mr. Alden opened the folder, revealing the bank memoranda, trust documents, and the original proposal pages. Narrator VO. Silence fell, not polite, not tentative, complete, unbroken silence. Narrator, VO. They had nothing left to say, no lies left to spin, no power left to wield. Narrator, VO. I stood tall, feeling decades of invisible labour crystallize into undeniable presence. Narrator, VO. The empire they thought was theirs alone had my fingerprints on every corner, every transaction, every saved deal. Narrator, VO. And in that room, they finally understood. I was not gone. I was not weak. I was the backbone they had ignored, and now at last they could see it. The room still held the echoes of disbelief, the tension thick enough to taste. They had expected a meek widow, a shadow to shuffle through their claims, a quiet nod to their spoils. Instead, they were confronted with truth. I stepped forward, holding the folder lightly in my hands, as if it were a child I had raised in secret. You mocked me. You erased me from your stories, from the house, from the history you thought you owned. But silence can only hide power for so long, and power, like truth, has a way of finding its voice. Gregory swallowed hard. Clarissa's lips trembled. The grandchildren stared, their phones abandoned in mid-air. No one dared speak.
Legally, all rights, all authorship, and all claims outlined in these documents belong to Mrs. Harrow. The will be read with these facts in mind.
I felt a quiet satisfaction, a long-suppressed heat that had nothing to do with revenge. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about trophies or spite. It was about reclamation, of dignity, of recognition, of the life I had always deserved. I folded the folder and placed it gently on the table. You see, this house, this empire, this legacy, it was never yours alone. And while you were busy claiming furniture and laughing at my age, I was claiming my place in history. The family shifted uncomfortably, finally aware that their inheritance had always been a shared story, and that I had written chapters they never imagined. I walked slowly to the window, letting sunlight spill over me. Outside, the roses Richard planted years ago were still there, wilting slightly, but alive. I touched the glass and smiled. I had been buried alive in plain sight, mocked and minimized, but now I was upright, seen, heard, undeniable. And in that quiet moment I realized, legacy is not measured in wealth alone. It is measured in presence, in courage, in the life you refuse to let anyone erase. I had built Soup. I had built an empire. I had built a story no one could steal. And at last the world knew my name, Evelyn Harrow.